The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach as it disappeared down the rutted road, leaving Catherine Moore standing alone on the wooden boardwalk with her trunk at her feet, and disbelief written across her face like a brand on cattle hide. The stagecoach driver had simply refused to take her any further, claiming she hadn't paid the full fare from St. Louis to Santa Fe, though Catherine had the receipt folded carefully in her reticule, proving otherwise. The man had been drinking whiskey all morning, his breath reeking of it when he'd yanked her belongings from the roof and deposited them unceremoniously in the dirt. Now she stood in Silver Ridge, New Mexico territory, a town she'd never intended to visit, watching her only transportation vanish into the September heat of 1878. Catherine was 23 years old, a schoolteacher by trade, and she'd been traveling west to take a position at a newly established school in Santa Fe. Her savings had gone into this journey, and she had exactly $7.32 remaining in her coin purse. The sun beat down mercilessly on her navy traveling dress, already covered in trail dust from 3 weeks of rough roads. Her auburn hair, normally pinned neatly beneath her hat, had come loose in wispy strands that stuck to her damp neck. Silver Ridge wasn't much to look at. The main street stretched perhaps 300 yards, lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith shop, a small hotel that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind, and a few other establishments she couldn't quite make out in the glare. Horses stood hitched to rails, switching their tails against flies. A few people moved along the boardwalks, going about their business with the slow, deliberate pace of those accustomed to the heat. Catherine lifted her trunk with both hands, grunting at the weight. She managed to drag it a few feet before her arms began to shake. Setting it down hard enough to raise more dust, she looked around desperately for help. The few men who'd been loitering near the saloon had already disappeared inside, probably to avoid being asked for assistance. "Need a hand with that?" The voice came from behind her, low and steady with a hint of Texas in the vowels. Catherine turned to find a man standing perhaps 10 feet away, one hand resting on the post that supported the awning overhead. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were an unusual shade of hazel green, watching her with what seemed like genuine concern rather than the calculating assessment she had grown used to from men on the trail. He wore dusty work clothes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, leather vest, worn denim pants, and scuffed boots with spurs that caught the light. A hat hung down his back on a cord, and a bandana was tied loosely around his neck. "I can manage," Catherine said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. She'd been raised to be independent, to not rely on strangers, especially male strangers in unfamiliar towns. The man smiled slightly, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Catherine's heart skip in a way she told herself was just from the exertion and heat. "I'm sure you can, but that trunk looks like it weighs near about as much as you do. Where are you trying to get it to?" "The hotel, I suppose," Catherine admitted, looking at the sad little building with its peeling paint and crooked sign. "Though I'm not certain how long I can afford to stay there." "You got stranded?" The man stepped closer, and Catherine caught the scent of leather, horse, and something clean like soap. "I saw that stagecoach driver. He's been trouble before, drinks too much and gets mean about it. He claimed I hadn't paid my full fare to Santa Fe, though I have the receipt proving I did. He simply left me here." Catherine heard the frustration in her own voice and tried to moderate it. "I apologize. I'm sure my troubles are of no concern to you." "Well now, that's where you're wrong," the man said easily. He moved to her trunk and lifted it with an ease that made Catherine feel foolish for struggling. "I'm Wyatt Sullivan, and helping folks is generally something I consider my concern. Come on, let's get you out of this sun before you get heat sick." Catherine followed him toward the hotel, half jogging to keep up with his long strides. "I'm Catherine Moore. I was supposed to be in Santa Fe by tomorrow. I have a teaching position waiting for me there." "Santa Fe's about 80 miles north of here," Wyatt said, pushing through the hotel door with his shoulder. The interior was dim and marginally cooler, smelling of dust and old cooking grease. A man dozed behind the counter, jerking awake when Wyatt set the trunk down with a solid thump. "Charlie, the lady needs a room." Charlie was perhaps 60, with a mostly bald head and suspicious eyes. $2 a night, paid in advance, no cooking in the rooms, no visitors after 9 o'clock. Catherine winced at the price, but opened her reticule. $2 would leave her with very little. She counted out the coins with hands that trembled slightly. Wyatt noticed. "Charlie, put it on my account. The ladies had a rough day." "No," Catherine said sharply. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Sullivan, but I can pay my own way." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps. Wyatt nodded slowly. "Fair enough, Charlie. Cancel that. But, Miss Moore, you might want to save your money for getting to Santa Fe. That's going to cost more than a hotel room." He was right, of course. Catherine completed the transaction, received a large iron key from Charlie, and watched as Wyatt carried her trunk up the narrow stairs to a small room that contained a bed, a washstand, and a chair with a broken back. When he set the trunk down, he turned to face her in the cramped space. "Thank you for your help," Catherine said formally. "I'm very grateful." "You're welcome." Wyatt made no move to leave. "Look, Miss Moore, I don't want to overstep, but you're in a difficult situation. Silver Ridge isn't on the main stage route. You could be waiting weeks for another coach to come through, and even then you'd have to pay full fare again." "I'm aware of that." Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The full weight of her predicament was settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. "I'll send a telegram to the school board in Santa Fe, explaining the situation. Perhaps they can send money for passage, though I hate to start a new position by asking for assistance. Or," Wyatt said slowly, "I could take you." Catherine looked up sharply. "Excuse me? I have a wagon and good horses. I was planning to head up to Cimarron in a few days anyway, which is northeast of Santa Fe. I could take you to Santa Fe first, then continue on. Wouldn't be but a day out of my way." "I couldn't possibly accept such an offer from a stranger," Catherine said, though something in her chest had lifted at his words. "It wouldn't be proper." Wyatt smiled again, and Catherine found herself wanting to see that smile more often. "This is New Mexico territory, Miss Moore. Propriety takes a back seat to practicality out here. But I understand your concern. Tell you what, you think on it. I'll be at the Silver Spur Saloon most of the evening if you change your mind. I won't take offense either way." He tipped an imaginary hat to her and left, his boots echoing on the wooden stairs. Catherine sat alone in the small room, listening to the sounds of the town filtering through the thin walls. Someone was playing a piano badly. Horses nickered and stomped. Men's voices rose and fell in conversation. She stood and went to the small, dirty window that looked out over the main street. From this vantage point, she could see more of Silver Ridge. It was a mining town, she realized, noticing the tailings pile on the hillside and the rough-looking men who moved in groups. Not dangerous necessarily, but not refined either. This was a place where people came to seek their fortunes and often found disappointment instead. Catherine poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the dust from her face and hands. The water turned brown immediately. She unpinned her hair and tried to put it right, studying her reflection in the small mirror over the washstand. She looked tired, she decided, and older than her 23 years. The journey had been hard, and this latest setback had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. The sensible thing to do was to accept Wyatt Sullivan's offer. He seemed trustworthy, though Catherine knew that appearances could be deceiving. But what other choice did she have? She couldn't afford to stay in Silver Ridge indefinitely, and she couldn't afford passage on another stagecoach, even if one came through. Her teaching position wouldn't wait forever. She thought about her parents back in Boston, who had been horrified when she had announced her intention to go west. Her mother had wept. Her father had threatened to disown her, though in the end, he'd given her $50 and his reluctant blessing. They'd wanted her to marry Benjamin Alcott, the banker's son, who had been courting her with all the enthusiasm of a man selecting a broodmare. Catherine had refused, wanting more from life than becoming some man's ornament and bearer of his children. Now, stranded in a dusty mining town with her money running out, she wondered if her parents had been right to worry. The sun was setting when Catherine finally left her room. She'd changed into a slightly less dusty dress, a deep green calico that her mother had made for her as a farewell gift. She'd repinned her hair and put on her best bonnet. If she was going to accept charity, she would at least look presentable doing it. The Silver Spur Saloon was easy to find, being the largest and loudest building on the street. Catherine paused outside, gathering her courage. She'd never entered a saloon in her life. Such places were not meant for respectable women. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the swinging doors. The noise hit her first, a wall of sound made up of male voices, laughter, the clink of glasses, and that same badly played piano she'd heard earlier. The smell was worse, a mixture of unwashed bodies, spilled beer, tobacco smoke, and something else she couldn't identify and didn't want to. Every head turned toward her, conversations dying mid-sentence. A woman in a low-cut dress and too much rouge stopped mid-laugh, staring at Catherine with undisguised hostility. Catherine spotted Wyatt at a table near the back, playing cards with 3 other men. He saw her at the same moment and stood immediately, his chair scraping across the floor. "Miss Moore," he said, weaving through the tables to reach her. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I've reconsidered your offer," Catherine said quietly, very aware of all the eyes still on her. "If it still stands, I would be grateful for transportation to Santa Fe." Wyatt's face split into a genuine smile. "It stands. Come on, let's talk outside. This isn't the place for you." He placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her out of the saloon. The touch was light, barely there, but Catherine felt it like a brand through the fabric of her dress. Once outside in the cooler evening air, she took a deep breath. "I apologize for interrupting your card game," she said. "Don't be. I was losing anyway." Wyatt leaned against the post, studying her in the fading light. "So you've decided to trust me?" "I've decided I have little choice," Catherine corrected. "But yes, I'm choosing to trust you. When would we leave?" "Day after tomorrow, at first light. That'll give me time to get supplies and make sure the wagon's in good shape. The journey will take 3 days, maybe 4, depending on weather and how the trail looks. I'll need to make a bed for you in the wagon, somewhere you can sleep separate from me. Don't want anyone getting the wrong idea about your reputation." Catherine felt herself flush. "I appreciate your consideration." "It's just common sense," Wyatt said. "You're a schoolteacher heading to a new position. Last thing you need is gossip following you." He paused. "I won't lie to you, Miss Moore. The trail can be dangerous. We'll be crossing some rough country, and there's always the chance of trouble. But I'm a good shot, and I know the land. I'll get you there safe." "I believe you," Catherine said, and was surprised to find she meant it. They made arrangements for the next 2 days. Wyatt would handle the preparations while Catherine rested and recovered from her journey. He refused to take payment for the trip, saying he was going that direction anyway, though Catherine insisted she would pay for her share of the supplies at least. That night, lying in the narrow hotel bed, with the sounds of the town drifting through the window, Catherine tried to analyze her decision. She was about to travel for several days alone with a man she'd just met. By Boston standards, by any standards of proper society, it was scandalous. But this wasn't Boston, and survival trumped scandal in the West. She thought about Wyatt Sullivan. He carried himself with confidence, but not arrogance. He'd been respectful, even gallant in an understated way. His hands had been calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard. When he'd smiled at her, something had stirred in her chest, something she'd never felt with Benjamin Alcott despite his proper courtship. Catherine told herself firmly that such thoughts were inappropriate. Wyatt was helping her out of kindness, nothing more. She would reach Santa Fe, begin her teaching position, and probably never see him again. The strange flutter in her stomach when she thought of his smile meant nothing. The next day passed slowly. Catherine walked the length of Silver Ridge's main street, such as it was, and bought some dried fruit and hardtack from the general store to contribute to their journey. The storekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, was friendly enough once she learned Catherine was a teacher. "We could use someone like you here, Mrs.," Patterson said, weighing out the fruit. "These mining towns need civilizing, and education's the way to do it. But I suppose Santa Fe's more appealing than Silver Ridge." "It's where I'm contracted to go," Catherine said diplomatically. "That Wyatt Sullivan's taking you, I hear. He's a good man. Known him since he first came to these parts about 5 years back. Works hard, minds his business, doesn't drink too much or gamble recklessly. Got a ranch about 10 miles out of town. Small, but he's building it up nice. Some of the ladies have set their caps for him, but he's never shown interest." Mrs. Patterson gave Catherine a speculative look. "Course, he's never offered to escort anyone to Santa Fe before either." Catherine felt her face warm. "He's simply being kind to someone in need." Mrs. Patterson said, in a tone that suggested she thought otherwise. Catherine saw Wyatt once that day, driving a wagon down the street toward the livery stable. He waved to her, and she waved back, feeling strangely shy, Several people noticed the exchange, and Catherine could practically hear the gossip starting. That evening, Wyatt came to the hotel to finalize their plans. They sat in the small parlor off the main entrance, the most public place available, with Charlie dozing behind his counter as chaperone. "We'll leave at dawn," Wyatt said. "I've packed supplies for 5 days, in case we run into delays. The wagon's solid, and the horses are my best team. I've rigged a cover over the back so you'll have shade during the day and privacy at night." "You've gone to a great deal of trouble," Catherine said. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. Truth is, I'm glad for the company. Gets lonely on the trail by yourself." Wyatt leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Tell me about this teaching position. You excited about it?" Catherine found herself telling him about the new school, about her hopes of making a difference in children's lives, about how she'd always wanted to teach. Wyatt listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention. When she asked about his ranch, his face lit up. "It's not much yet," he admitted. "Got about 200 acres, maybe 30 head of cattle, a few horses. The house is small, just 2 rooms really, but it's solid. I built it myself with help from some friends. There's a creek that runs through the property, never goes dry even in summer. Good grazing land, room to expand. I figure in another 5 years, I can have a real operation going." "You came here from Texas?" Catherine asked, remembering the accent. "Originally, yes. Left home when I was 18, worked cattle drives for a few years, saved my money. Came to New Mexico Territory when I was 21 and bought the land. Been working it ever since." He was 26 now, he told her, old enough to know what he wanted, but young enough to have the energy to achieve it. They talked until Charlie woke up and announced pointedly that it was past 9 o'clock. Wyatt left with a promise to collect Catherine at dawn, and Catherine climbed the stairs to her room, feeling more content than she had since the stagecoach had abandoned her. Dawn came cold and clear. Catherine dressed quickly in her most practical traveling dress and sturdy boots. She pinned her hair tightly and covered it with her bonnet. When she carried her trunk downstairs, Wyatt was already waiting with the wagon pulled up outside. The wagon was well made and clearly well maintained. 2 strong horses stood in the traces, their breath steaming in the cool air. Wyatt had indeed rigged a canvas cover over the back, creating a sheltered space lined with blankets. "Morning," Wyatt greeted her, taking her trunk and securing it in the wagon with practiced ease. "Sleep well?" "Well enough. Thank you." Catherine accepted his hand to climb up onto the seat. His grip was firm and warm, and he released her the moment she was settled. The town was just waking as they drove through. A few miners were heading toward the diggings, lunch pails in hand. The blacksmith was stoking his forge, sparks flying into the dim light. Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway of her store, waving to Catherine as they passed. Once they left Silver Ridge behind, the landscape opened up around them. The sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The land was dramatic, all mazes and canyons and distant mountains. Catherine, who had spent her entire life in the green, gentle landscape of New England, found it both harsh and beautiful. Wyatt drove with easy competence, keeping the horses to a steady pace. He pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her the names of distant peaks and explaining the geography. When the sun grew hot, he stopped to let the horses rest and offered Catherine water from a canteen. "We'll make good time today," he said, studying the sky. "Weather's holding and the trail's in decent shape. Tonight we'll camp near a spring, I know. There's some trees for shelter and good grass for the horses." "Have you made this journey often?" Catherine asked. "Few times a year. I sell cattle in Santa Fe when I have enough to make the trip worthwhile, and I buy supplies there that I can't get in Silver Ridge. Know the route pretty well by now." They fell into an easy silence as they traveled. Catherine found herself relaxing, enjoying the vastness of the landscape and the steady rhythm of the wagon wheels. Wyatt occasionally hummed under his breath, old songs she half recognized. Around midday, he pulled the wagon into the shade of a large rock formation and announced it was time to rest and eat. Catherine climbed down stiffly, her body aching from the constant jostling. Wyatt pulled out bread, cheese, and dried apples, dividing them evenly between them. "How did you end up becoming a teacher?" he asked as they ate. Catherine thought about how to answer. "My mother was a teacher before she married. She taught me to read when I was very young, and I fell in love with books, with learning. When I was old enough, I attended the normal school in Boston and earned my teaching certificate. I taught for 2 years at a girls' academy there, But you wanted to come west? I wanted something more than what Boston offered. The academy was fine, but it was all about teaching wealthy girls to be proper ladies. I wanted to teach children who really needed education, who might not get it otherwise. When I saw the advertisement for the Santa Fe position, something in me just knew I had to go. Wyatt nodded slowly. That takes courage, leaving everything familiar for something unknown. Or foolishness, Catherine said with a slight smile. My parents certainly thought so. I think it's courage. Wyatt's eyes met hers, and Catherine felt that flutter again, and stronger this time. It takes a brave person to chase what they want, instead of settling for what's expected. They continued on through the afternoon. The landscape shifted subtly, the mesas giving way to more rolling terrain. Catherine spotted wildlife, deer and rabbits and birds she couldn't name. Once Wyatt pointed out a golden eagle soaring overhead, and they watched together as it rode the thermals, master of its domain. As the sun began to set, Wyatt guided the wagon off the main trail toward a cluster of cottonwood trees. Catherine could hear water running before she saw the spring, a clear stream bubbling up from the rocks and forming a small pool before continuing on. This is perfect, Catherine said, climbing down from the wagon. Used it before. Good place to camp. Wyatt began unhitching the horses, moving with efficient economy. Why don't you gather some firewood while I tend to the horses? Nothing too big, just kindling and small branches. Enough for a cook fire. Catherine did as he suggested, grateful for something useful to do. By the time she returned with an armful of wood, Wyatt had the horses hobbled and grazing, and had cleared a fire pit ringed with stones. He took the wood from her with a nod of thanks and had a fire going within minutes. I've got bacon and beans for dinner, he said, pulling supplies from the wagon. Can make coffee too, if you'd like. Let me help. Catherine moved beside him, and together they prepared the simple meal. She was surprised by how comfortable it felt, working alongside him as the stars began to appear overhead. The food was plain but good, and they ate sitting on blankets by the fire, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Tell me about your ranch, Catherine said, wanting to keep him talking. She liked his voice, the slow Texas drawl that made even ordinary words sound interesting. Wyatt talked about his plans, about wanting to build up his herd, about maybe raising horses along with cattle. He talked about the house he wanted to build someday, bigger than what he had now, with multiple rooms and a real porch. His face was animated in the firelight, his eyes distant as he described his dreams. Sounds lonely, though, Catherine observed. Living out there by yourself. It is sometimes, Wyatt admitted. But I've been too busy building the place to think much about it. Figured once I get established, then I'd think about other things. A wife, family, that sort of thing. He looked embarrassed suddenly, as if he'd revealed too much. It's good to have dreams, Catherine said softly. To know what you're working toward. Their eyes met across the fire, and something hung in the air between them, something unnamed but present. Wyatt looked away first, standing to add more wood to the fire. You should sleep, he said. I've made up a bed for you in the wagon. I'll sleep out here by the fire. Keep watch. Is that necessary? Keeping watch? Probably not, but it's a habit. Rather be cautious than sorry. He helped her into the wagon, showing her where he'd arranged blankets to make a comfortable sleeping area. You need anything, you just call out. I'll hear you. Catherine settled into the makeshift bed, surprised by how comfortable it was. Through the canvas cover, she could see the stars, more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, spread across the sky like scattered diamonds. She could hear Wyatt moving around outside, the crackle of the fire, the horses stirring occasionally. She felt safe, she realized. Safer than she'd felt on the stagecoach with a driver and other passengers. Here, in the middle of nowhere, with a man she barely knew, she felt protected and cared for. It should have worried her, but instead, it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets. The second day of travel began much like the first. They were on the trail by dawn, the horses fresh and eager. The landscape continued to change as they traveled north, becoming more varied with stands of pine trees appearing on the hillsides. Wyatt was more talkative today, perhaps having gotten past his initial caution. He told her stories about his time working cattle drives, about storms and stampedes and river crossings. He told her about coming to New Mexico territory, about how he'd fallen in love with the land at first sight. Catherine found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, about her dreams of making a real difference in the world, about her frustration with the narrow confines of Boston society, about how she'd felt stifled her entire life until she made the decision to come west. "You ever regret it?" Wyatt asked. "Leaving Boston?" "Not once," Catherine said firmly. "Even when the stagecoach driver stranded me, even when I thought I might be stuck in Silver Ridge indefinitely, I didn't regret the decision to come west. I only regretted the circumstances. I understand that feeling. When I left Texas, my father said I'd be back within a year, tail between my legs. Said I didn't have what it takes to make it on my own. That was 8 years ago, and I haven't been back once." "Do you miss your family?" Wyatt shrugged. "Sometimes, but we didn't see eye to eye on much. My father wanted me to work his ranch, do things his way, live his life. I wanted to build something of my own. We parted on hard terms, and I'm not sure those terms can be mended." Catherine heard the pain beneath his matter-of-fact words. She reached out impulsively and touched his arm. "I'm sorry. No need to be. Life is full of hard choices. We make them and live with them." But he smiled at her, and his hand came up to briefly cover hers where it rested on his arm. They stopped for lunch at a trading post, a low adobe building that appeared to be deserted until Wyatt hallooed, and an ancient man shuffled out. They bought fresh bread and discussed the trail conditions ahead, while Catherine stretched her legs and marveled at the primitive nature of the outpost. "We're making good time," Wyatt told her as they prepared to leave. "If it holds, we'll reach Santa Fe by tomorrow evening, day earlier than I expected." Catherine felt a strange pang at those words. She should be happy that her destination was near, but instead she felt an odd reluctance. Once they reached Santa Fe, this time with Wyatt would end. He would continue on to Cimarron, and she would take up her teaching position, and their paths would likely never cross again. The afternoon grew hot, and storm clouds began to build on the horizon. Wyatt watched them with a practiced eye, urging the horses to a faster pace. "Storm coming," he said. "Might hit before we can make camp. If it does, we'll need to find shelter quick. Flash floods are dangerous out here." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. The horses grew nervous, tossing their heads. Catherine gripped the edge of the seat as Wyatt guided the wagon off the trail toward a rocky overhang he'd apparently spotted. They'd just gotten the wagon positioned and the horses secured when the storm hit. Rain came in sheets, driven by wind that howled between the rocks. Lightning cracked overhead, so close Catherine could feel the hair on her arms rise. Thunder followed immediately, deafening. Wyatt pulled Catherine deeper under the overhang, his arm around her shoulders, sheltering her with his body as the storm raged. She could feel his heart beating against her back, steady and strong. Without thinking, she leaned into him, seeking comfort and warmth. The storm lasted perhaps 20 minutes, but felt much longer. When it finally passed, moving east with the same fury it had arrived, they were both soaked despite the shelter. Wyatt's arm was still around Catherine, and she made no move to pull away. "You all right?" His voice was low, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes." Catherine turned slightly, enough to look up at his face. Water dripped from his hair, ran down his cheeks. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to narrow to just this moment, this connection. Wyatt's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a drop of rain. "Catherine," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like something precious. She knew what was about to happen, and she made no move to stop it. When he lowered his head and his lips met hers, it felt inevitable, like gravity, like the sunrise. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, and Catherine answered by pressing closer. His arms came around her fully, and she wound hers around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that made her forget the cold, the wet, everything but the feel of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan that." "I know." Catherine's hands were still in his hair, unable to let go. "I've been wanting to do it since I first saw you standing there in Silver Ridge, looking lost and determined all at once." "Just since then?" Catherine surprised herself with her boldness. Wyatt laughed, a real laugh that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Fair point. Maybe I've been wanting to kiss you since about 5 minutes after I first saw you." They stood there under the overhang, wrapped in each other's arms, as the sun broke through the clouds and painted everything in shades of gold. Finally, reluctantly, they drew apart. "We should get you into dry clothes," Wyatt said practically, though his eyes were still dark with emotion. Don't want you catching cold." Catherine changed in the wagon while Wyatt tended to the horses and got a fire going despite the damp wood. When she emerged in a dry dress with her hair hanging loose down her back to dry, Wyatt stopped what he was doing and just looked at her. "You're beautiful," he said simply. And Catherine felt beautiful, perhaps for the first time in her life. They made camp there under the overhang since the ground was too wet to travel safely. As they prepared dinner together, bumping shoulders and sharing smiles, Catherine felt something shifting in her chest, in her understanding of herself and what she wanted. She'd come west seeking independence, seeking to prove she could make her own way. She'd been so focused on not needing anyone, on being completely self-sufficient. But standing here with Wyatt, working together to build a fire and cook a meal, she realized that independence didn't mean being alone. It meant choosing who you wanted beside you. That night, after they'd eaten and the fire had burned down to coals, they sat close together under a blanket, looking at the stars that had emerged brilliant and clear after the storm. "Catherine," Wyatt said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "All right. When we get to Santa Fe tomorrow, I'm not sure I can just leave you there and ride away. These past 2 days, getting to know you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Catherine's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast. I know you have plans. I know you barely know me. But I need you to know how I feel before we reach Santa Fe, before you take that teaching position and I ride on to Cimarron." Catherine turned to face him fully. The firelight cast shadows across his face, but his eyes were clear and steady. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I didn't expect it, didn't plan for it, but it's happening. So, what do we do about it?" It was the question Catherine had been asking herself since that kiss. "I don't know. I have a contract with the school board. They're expecting me. I can't just not show up." "I'm not asking you to. You should take the position, fulfill your obligation. I'm just asking if, maybe once you're settled, I could come courting, proper-like. Give us a chance to see if this is real." "It feels real," Catherine said softly. "I think so too. But we should be sure. You should teach for a while, get established in Santa Fe, meet other people. If you still feel this way in a few months, then we'll know it's not just the circumstances, not just being thrown together on the trail. It was sensible, reasonable, the kind of thing Catherine appreciated. But part of her wanted to throw sense to the wind, to tell him she didn't need a few months to know what her heart was already certain of. "All right," she said finally. "We'll do it the right way. But, Wyatt, I already know what my heart will say in a few months." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Mine too. But I want to do this right by you, Catherine. You deserve to be courted properly, not rushed into something because circumstances threw us together." They slept apart that night, maintaining propriety even as their hearts pulled them together. But Catherine lay awake for a long time, her fingers touching her lips where Wyatt had kissed her, her mind spinning with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to imagine. The next day dawned clear and bright. They made good time, the horses seeming to sense that their destination was near. The landscape changed again, becoming more settled, with occasional farms and ranches visible from the trail. They passed other travelers, a family in a wagon, a group of Mexican vaqueros driving cattle. As afternoon stretched toward evening, Santa Fe appeared on the horizon. Catherine felt a complex tangle of emotions, excitement about her new position, anxiety about starting over in a strange place, and a deep reluctance to part from Wyatt. The town was larger than Catherine had expected, spreading across the landscape with a mixture of adobe buildings and newer wooden construction. The architecture was different from anything she'd seen, reflecting Spanish and Mexican influences. The plaza at the center of town bustled with activity. Wyatt navigated the streets with some difficulty, asking directions twice before finding the schoolhouse. It was a new building, sturdy and well-made, with glass windows and a bell tower. Next to it stood a small house, presumably the teacher's residence. "This is it," Catherine said, trying to sound enthusiastic. Wyatt helped her down from the wagon and retrieved her trunk. As he carried it to the door of the teacher's house, a woman emerged from the schoolhouse, followed by a distinguished-looking man. "Miss Moore," the woman called, "we've been expecting you. When you didn't arrive yesterday, we were beginning to worry." Catherine explained about the stagecoach driver abandoning her, glossing over the details of her journey with Wyatt. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Harriet Chen, the wife of the school board president, clucked sympathetically and assured Catherine that the previous driver's actions would be reported. Mr. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had made his fortune in trade, welcomed Catherine warmly and began explaining her duties. Wyatt stood back, holding his hat, clearly preparing to leave. "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen," Catherine said quickly, "this is Mr. Wyatt Sullivan, who very kindly brought me here from Silver Ridge when I was stranded. I owe him a great debt." "We all do," Mr. Chen said, shaking Wyatt's hand. "Thank you for ensuring our teacher arrived safely." "My pleasure," Wyatt said. His eyes met Catherine's over the Chens' heads, full of unspoken words. After the Chens had shown Catherine her house, a tidy two-room cottage with simple but adequate furnishings, and departed with promises to return in the morning to discuss her curriculum, Catherine walked outside to find Wyatt waiting by his wagon. "I should head out," he said. "Want to make a few miles before full dark." "When will I see you again?" Catherine asked, not caring that her voice revealed her emotions. "Give me 2 weeks. I need to get to Cimarron, conduct my business, get back to my ranch, and handle some things there. Then I'll come to Santa Fe, and we can do this proper. I'll take you to dinner, we can walk in the plaza, maybe attend church together, give the town something to talk about." Catherine smiled despite the ache in her chest. 2 weeks seems like a long time. "It'll go fast. You'll be busy getting settled, meeting your students, planning lessons. Time will fly." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "Catherine, these past few days have been the best of my life. I meant what I said last night. I'm falling in love with you, and I intend to court you properly and, if you'll have me, marry you someday." "I'll have you," Catherine said, tears pricking her eyes. "In 2 weeks or 2 years, whenever you ask, the answer will be yes." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, right there in the street where anyone could see, and kissed her thoroughly. When he released her, they were both breathless. 2 weeks, he promised, climbing into the wagon. "Count on it." Catherine stood watching until the wagon disappeared around a corner. Then she went inside her new house, closed the door, and let herself cry, equal parts sad at his departure and happy at the promise of his return. The 2 weeks that followed were indeed busy. Catherine met her students, a diverse group of 20 children ranging from age 6 to 14, Anglo, Hispanic, and Native American. She threw herself into teaching, discovering a natural rapport with the children and a deep satisfaction in the work. Santa Fe was a welcoming town, far more cosmopolitan than she'd expected. The Chens took her under their wing, introducing her to the community and inviting her to dinner. Catherine learned that Mrs. Chen had been a teacher herself in San Francisco before marrying, and they formed a quick friendship. But through all of it, Catherine thought about Wyatt. At night in her small house, she would remember the feel of his arms around her, the taste of his kiss, the way he'd looked at her in the firelight. She counted the days, marking them off in her mind. On the 14th day, as Catherine was dismissing her students for the afternoon, she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw children gathering around something, pointing and chattering excitedly. When she went to investigate, her heart nearly stopped. Wyatt sat astride a beautiful bay horse, leading a smaller gray mare on a rope. He was cleaned up, wearing what were clearly his best clothes, a black hat that looked new, and a smile that made Catherine's knees weak. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, trying to maintain her dignity as her teacher, even as joy flooded through her. "Miss Moore," he replied formally, though his eyes danced. "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of going riding with me tomorrow, it being Saturday and you having no school." "I would be delighted, Mr. Sullivan." The children giggled and whispered, and Catherine knew the entire town would be discussing this by sunset. She found she didn't care. Wyatt dismounted and walked over to her, the children scattering to give them space. "I brought you the mare," he said quietly. "Gentle as they come, perfect for a lady. If you're going to be courted by a rancher, you'll need to know how to ride." "That's very presumptuous, Mr. Sullivan," Catherine said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I know, but I'm hoping you don't mind." "I don't mind at all." They stood there grinning at each other like fools until Mrs. Chen emerged from the schoolhouse and pointedly cleared her throat. "Miss Moore, perhaps you should invite Mr. Sullivan to join us for dinner this evening. My husband would very much like to thank him properly for ensuring you arrived safely." It was clearly a ruse to chaperone them, but Catherine accepted gratefully. That evening, at the Chen's comfortable home, Wyatt charmed his hosts with stories of ranching and impressed Mr. Chen with his knowledge of cattle markets. Catherine watched him, seeing how he navigated this social situation with the same easy confidence he'd shown on the trail. After dinner, Wyatt walked Catherine home through the plaza, which was lit with lanterns and bustling with evening activity. They kept a proper distance, but Catherine was intensely aware of him beside her. "Your students seem to like you," Wyatt observed. "Heard some of them talking about you in the street. Said you're the best teacher they've ever had." "They're wonderful children, bright and eager to learn. I feel very fortunate." They reached her house too soon. Wyatt stopped at the gate, making no move to come closer. "Tomorrow at 9, I'll bring the horses. We can ride out to the foothills. There's beautiful country just beyond town." "I'll be ready, though I should warn you, I've never ridden a horse before." "I'll teach you. It's easier than you think." He reached out and briefly touched her hand. "I missed you, Catherine. These 2 weeks felt like 2 years. I missed you too, every single day." He left her there with a promise to return in the morning, and Catherine went inside feeling like she was floating. The riding lesson the next day was both frustrating and wonderful. Catherine had trouble getting the hang of posting at a trot and nearly fell off twice, but Wyatt was patient and encouraging. He led her mare on a rope until she felt more confident, then let her try on her own. By the end of the afternoon, Catherine was exhausted, sore, and happier than she'd been in weeks. Thus began a pattern that would continue for the next 3 months. Wyatt came to Santa Fe every 2 weeks, staying for 3 or 4 days each time. He rented a room at a respectable boarding house and courted Catherine with all the propriety her position required. They attended church together, dined at the Chen's or other friends' homes, took chaperoned walks in the plaza. But they also stole moments alone, riding out into the countryside, where they could talk freely and, occasionally, steal kisses when no one was watching. Wyatt told Catherine more about his ranch, about his dreams of building it into something substantial. Catherine told him about her students, about the satisfaction she found in teaching, about how Santa Fe had become home more quickly than she'd expected. "I have something to ask you," Wyatt said one December afternoon, as they stood on a hillside overlooking Santa Fe. The weather had turned cold, and they were bundled in coats and scarves. "I know we've only been courting a few months, but, Catherine, I'm as certain of my feelings now as I was that night by the fire, more certain even. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Catherine had known this question was coming, had been preparing for it, but still her heart raced. "Yes. Yes, of course I will." Wyatt pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small stone that caught the winter sunlight. "It's not much, but it's honest money, earned from honest work." "It's perfect." Catherine held out her hand, and Wyatt slipped the ring on her finger. It fit as if made for her. They married in February of 1879, in a simple ceremony at the church with the Chens and several of Catherine's students in attendance. Catherine wore a blue dress she'd bought specially for the occasion, and Wyatt wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. The school board had agreed to let Catherine continue teaching until the end of the spring term, after which they would hire a replacement. She and Wyatt would live in her teacher's house until then, with Wyatt making the 10-mile ride to his ranch several times a week to handle necessary work. The compromise allowed Catherine to fulfill her obligations while beginning her married life, and she was grateful for it. Those months were busy and joyful, dividing her time between her students and her new husband, learning the rhythms of married life. Wyatt was patient with her inexperience, gentle and caring. He made her laugh with stories of ranch mishaps, supported her when particularly difficult students tried her patience, and held her at night with a tenderness that made her feel cherished. When spring came and Catherine's term ended, they prepared to move to Wyatt's ranch. Catherine was both excited and nervous about this next phase of her life. She'd grown to love teaching, and leaving her students was harder than she'd expected. But the pull toward building a life with Wyatt on his ranch was stronger. The ranch, when they arrived with a wagon full of Catherine's belongings, was exactly as Wyatt had described. The house was small but solid, with good bones and room to expand. The land stretched out in all directions, rolling grassland dotted with cattle bearing Wyatt's brand. "It's wonderful," Catherine said, standing in the doorway and looking out at what was now her home. "It will be," Wyatt said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "With you here, It finally feels complete. They settled into ranch life. Catherine learned to manage a household with limited resources, to cook on a wood stove, to tend a vegetable garden. Wyatt taught her more about riding until she was confident enough to ride out with him to check on the cattle. She learned to recognize individual cows, to spot signs of illness or injury, to understand the rhythms of ranch work. It was hard work, harder than teaching had been in many ways, but Catherine found satisfaction in it. She and Wyatt worked side by side, building their life together. In the evenings, exhausted from the day's labor, they would sit on the porch Wyatt had built and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "I've been thinking," Catherine said one evening as they sat there, "about expanding the house, maybe adding a nursery." Wyatt turned to look at her sharply. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Catherine smiled, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "I think by the new year, we'll need that nursery." Wyatt's whoop of joy startled the horses in the corral. He picked Catherine up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We're going to have a baby? We're going to have a baby." That fall, Wyatt expanded the house, adding 2 new rooms with help from neighbors who came for a barn-raising-style work party. The nursery took shape, and Catherine filled it with items she made or traded for, preparing for the arrival of their child. Winter came, cold and harsh, and Catherine spent much of it indoors, her belly growing round. Wyatt was attentive and worried, fussing over her in ways that were both endearing and slightly annoying. When the snows came heavy, isolating them for days at a time, they played cards and read aloud from books Catherine had brought from Boston and talked about names for the baby. The baby arrived in early January of 1880, during a brief warm spell that melted the snow. The birth was long and difficult, attended by a midwife Wyatt had brought from Silver Ridge. Catherine labored through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Wyatt, pacing outside, feared he would lose her. But when the baby's cry finally echoed through the house, Catherine was exhausted but alive, and Wyatt burst into the room to find his wife holding a squalling, red-faced infant. "It's a boy," Catherine said tiredly, but with joy shining in her eyes. "A son, Wyatt." Wyatt took the baby with trembling hands, staring down at the tiny face with wonder. "He's perfect." They named him James, after Catherine's father, though they called him Jamie. He was a good baby, content and healthy, and watching Wyatt with his son filled Catherine's heart to overflowing. The hard-working rancher became gentle and silly with his child, singing off-key lullabies and making faces to elicit those precious baby smiles. Life on the ranch continued, busier now, with a baby to care for, but no less satisfying. Catherine learned to manage ranch duties with a baby on her hip, and Jamie seemed to thrive in the wide-open spaces. When Jamie was 2, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Catherine's auburn hair and Wyatt's hazel-green eyes, and she was strong-willed from birth, letting her preferences be known with a healthy set of lungs. The ranch grew along with their family. Wyatt's herd increased, and he was able to hire seasonal help during roundup and branding. Catherine started a small business selling eggs and butter to the trading post in Silver Ridge, providing extra income that helped during lean times. In 1883, a new schoolhouse was built near Silver Ridge, and Catherine was asked if she would be willing to teach again. She discussed it with Wyatt, torn between her desire to teach and her responsibilities at home. They compromised, Catherine agreeing to teach 3 days a week, with Wyatt managing the children on those days. It worked better than either had expected. Catherine found fulfillment in teaching while still being present for her family. Wyatt proved to be a capable parent, and Jamie and Rose thrived with the balance of both parents' attention. Years passed, marked by the changing of seasons and the growth of children. Jamie grew tall and serious, helping his father with ranch work as soon as he was able. Rose remained strong-willed, but added kindness to her repertoire, showing a particular gentleness with animals. In 1887, when Jamie was 7 and Rose was 5, Catherine gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and David. The birth was easier than her previous ones, perhaps because Catherine was now experienced, or perhaps because twins simply wanted to be born. They were identical, with dark hair and mischievous grins, and they turned the household into joyful chaos. The ranch house expanded again to accommodate the growing family. Wyatt, with help from neighbors and hired hands, added a second story and more rooms. The house that had started as 2 rooms was now a proper family home, sturdy and comfortable. Catherine stood on the porch one evening in the summer of 1890, watching Wyatt teach Jamie how to rope a fence post, while Rose chased the twins through the yard, their laughter floating on the evening air. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to years of hard work. It was hard to believe that 12 years had passed since that September day in 1878, when she'd stood stranded and alone in Silver Ridge. So much had happened, so much had changed. She'd gone from being a frightened woman, abandoned by a stagecoach driver, to this, a wife, a mother, a rancher, a teacher. A woman who had found exactly what she'd been seeking when she left Boston, though she hadn't known it at the time. Wyatt caught her eye and smiled, that same smile that had made her heart skip when she first saw it. He left Jamie practicing his throws and walked over to the porch, climbing the steps to stand beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky I am." Catherine leaned into him, fitting against his side as naturally as breathing. "If that stagecoach driver hadn't left me stranded, none of this would have happened. I'd probably still be in Boston, teaching at that girls' academy, maybe married to Benjamin Alcott." "God forbid," Wyatt said with feeling, making Catherine laugh. "I think about that sometimes, how one person's cruelty led to all this happiness. It doesn't seem fair that something bad brought something so good. Maybe that's just how life works sometimes. We can't control what happens to us, only what we do about it." Wyatt turned to face her fully. "You were brave enough to accept help from a stranger. I was fool enough to fall in love with you on sight. And here we are." "Here we are," Catherine echoed softly. Jamie called out, asking his father to check his rope work. Rose appeared with the twins, demanding that someone settle an argument about whose turn it was to gather eggs. The moment of quiet reflection ended, swallowed by the happy chaos of family life. That night, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Catherine and Wyatt sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars they had watched that night by the fire when Wyatt had first told her he was falling in love with her. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Taking on a stranded schoolteacher? Your life would have been simpler without me." Wyatt looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Simpler maybe, but empty. Catherine, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and those children in there. You're everything I worked for, everything I wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it." "I love you," Catherine said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time she'd said them. "I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, one of the twins cried out briefly in his sleep, then settled. A coyote howled in the distance. The wind rustled through the grass. Catherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Boston to Santa Fe to this ranch in the middle of New Mexico territory. She thought about the stagecoach driver who'd stranded her, an act of cruelty that had inadvertently given her everything. She thought about Wyatt saying, "I'll take you wherever you need," and not realizing that where she needed to be was right here, with him. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Catherine continued teaching 3 days a week, watching her students grow and learn while her own children did the same. Jamie developed into a fine young man, responsible and hard-working, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's thoughtful nature. Rose discovered a talent for mathematics that surprised everyone, and she began helping her father with the ranch accounts while still in her early teens. The twins, Daniel and David, remained inseparable and mischievous. They had a talent for getting into trouble that tested both Catherine and Wyatt's patience, but they were good boys at heart, kind and generous with their younger siblings when, in 1892, Catherine gave birth to one more child, another daughter they named Mary after Wyatt's mother. Mary was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. She was the calm center of the storm, unruffled by her boisterous older brothers and strong-willed sister. Jamie, now 12, was protective of her in a way that made Catherine's heart swell. The ranch continued to prosper. Wyatt's herd had grown to several hundred head, and he'd added horses to their operation as he'd always dreamed. The Sullivan Ranch became known throughout the territory for producing quality stock, and buyers came from as far as Texas and Colorado to purchase their animals. Catherine's teaching expanded as well. The little schoolhouse near Silver Ridge added a second room, and Catherine was instrumental in establishing a small lending library, donating many of her own books and encouraging others to do the same. Education mattered to her as much as it ever had, and she took pride in watching her students go on to make something of themselves. In 1895, when Jamie was 15, he asked his father if he could start managing his own small herd, a portion of the ranch set aside for him to build up. Wyatt agreed, proud of his son's initiative, and Jamie threw himself into the work with determination. He had his father's vision and his mother's discipline, a powerful combination. Rose, at 13, announced that she wanted to attend a proper school in Santa Fe to get the kind of education that would prepare her for college. It was a bold ambition for a girl, especially a rancher's daughter, but Catherine and Wyatt supported her. The Chens, who had remained close friends over the years, agreed to let Rose board with them during the school year, and so she went off to Santa Fe with Catherine's blessing and a trunk full of books. The twins, now 8, took over some of Rose's responsibilities on the ranch, though their work was often interspersed with games and adventures. They had a fort in the cottonwoods by the creek and spent hours there when they weren't helping with chores. Mary, at 3, followed her mother everywhere, a small shadow helping with housework and garden tending. She had a gift with growing things, and even at her young age, she could coax plants to thrive. Catherine stood in her kitchen one morning, kneading bread while Mary sat on the floor playing with dried beans, and marveled at how full her life had become. The kitchen was large and bright, with windows that looked out over the yard and pastures beyond. Copper pots hung from hooks, and the shelves were lined with preserves she'd put up from her garden. This was so far from the life she'd imagined for herself in Boston. She'd thought teaching was her calling, her sole purpose. She'd never imagined herself as a ranch wife and mother of 5, but standing there with flour on her hands and her daughter's chatter filling the room, Catherine couldn't imagine wanting anything different. Wyatt came in for the noon meal, bringing the twins with him. They were dusty and tired, but pleased with themselves, having successfully helped move cattle to a new pasture. Over the simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, they chattered about the work, and Catherine watched her family with contentment. "Mama," Daniel said suddenly, "tell us again about how you and Papa met." It was a story she'd told many times, but the children never tired of it. Catherine looked at Wyatt, who smiled and nodded. "Well," she began, "it was September of 1878, and I was 23 years old, traveling from Boston to Santa Fe to take a teaching position. The stagecoach driver left me stranded in Silver Ridge, and I thought my entire life was ruined." "But then Papa came?" Mary said, knowing the story by heart, even at her young age. "But then your father came," Catherine confirmed. "He saw me struggling with my trunk and asked if I needed help. And when I told him I needed to get to Santa Fe but had no way to do so, he said the most important words anyone has ever said to me." "What did he say?" the twins chorused, even though they knew. Catherine looked at Wyatt, love and gratitude shining in her eyes. "He said, 'I'll take you wherever you need.'" "And he did," David said with satisfaction. "And he did," Catherine agreed. "He took me to Santa Fe, and along the way, we fell in love. And that love gave me all of you, and this life, and everything I never knew I needed." "That's romantic," Mary said dreamily. The twins made gagging noises, and Jamie laughed. Wyatt reached across the table and took Catherine's hand, squeezing gently. The years continued their steady march. Rose excelled in Santa Fe, eventually being accepted to a teaching college in Colorado. She left the ranch with Catherine's old trunk, filled with books and clothes and dreams, and Catherine cried watching her go, even as she burst with pride. Jamie, at 18, met a girl at a dance in Silver Ridge, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was sweet and practical and perfect for him. They courted for a year before marrying in the spring of 1898. And Wyatt built them a small house on the far end of the ranch property. Within a year, Catherine was a grandmother, doting on a baby boy named after his grandfather. The twins went to work for the ranch full-time once they finished their basic schooling, showing no interest in leaving. They were good workers when focused, and Wyatt was training them in all aspects of ranching. Mary, at 9, spent more time helping her mother than working outside, though she could ride as well as any of her siblings. She had declared her intention to be a teacher like her mother, and Catherine had begun working with her on advanced subjects. In 1900, as the new century dawned, the Sullivan Ranch celebrated its 20th anniversary. Wyatt threw a party, inviting neighbors and friends from miles around. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food. Fiddle music filled the air as people danced and children ran wild. Catherine, now 45 years old, stood with Wyatt watching the celebration. Her hair had threads of gray now, and lines creased her face, but Wyatt thought she'd never been more beautiful. 20 years, he said wonderingly. Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago, all at once. Do you remember what you said that day in Silver Ridge? Catherine asked. When I tried to refuse your help. I said you were in a difficult situation, and I could take you wherever you needed to go. Wyatt pulled her close. Turned out you needed to come here, to me, to this life we've built. I did need it, I just didn't know it yet. Catherine looked around at the gathering, at Jamie with his wife and son, at the twins dancing with local girls, at Mary helping serve food, at Rose who had come home from college for the celebration. You took me where I needed to be, Wyatt, right here, with you. Best decision I ever made, Wyatt said, was offering to help a stranded schoolteacher in Silver Ridge. They danced that evening as the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over them that night by the campfire 22 years earlier. Catherine rested her head on Wyatt's shoulder, moving with him to the fiddle's tune, and thought about destiny and choice and how sometimes the two were the same thing. Life on the ranch continued through the new century's first decade. The twins, now grown men in their 20s, both married within a year of each other. Daniel wed a girl from Silver Ridge, and David married a teacher who had come west from Missouri. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. Rose finished her teaching degree and took a position at a school in Albuquerque. She married late, at 30, to a fellow teacher who shared her passion for education. They had 2 children, daughters who inherited their mother's mathematical mind and their grandmother's determination. Mary followed her dream and became a teacher, taking over Catherine's position at the Silver Ridge School when Catherine finally retired at 53. Catherine had taught for over 25 years, total, and had impacted hundreds of lives. Former students would stop by the ranch occasionally to thank her, bringing their own children, telling her how she'd made a difference. Jamie took over more and more of the ranch operations as Wyatt aged, though Wyatt remained active and engaged. The ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres, supporting a substantial herd and producing fine horses sought after throughout the territory. The Sullivan brand was respected, synonymous with quality and fair dealing. In 1910, New Mexico was moving towards statehood, a change that brought both excitement and anxiety. Catherine and Wyatt, now in their mid-50s, watched the political changes with interest, attending town meetings and voting when the time came. They were grandparents many times over now, with 11 grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers. The big house that Wyatt had built and expanded over the years was often filled with visiting children and grandchildren, especially during holidays. Catherine's hair had gone fully silver, and Wyatt's face was weathered and lined, but they remained devoted to each other, still taking evening walks around the ranch when weather permitted, still sitting on the porch watching sunsets, still reaching for each other in the night. "We're getting old," Wyatt observed one evening as they sat on that familiar porch. He was 60 now, his body bearing the aches and pains of a lifetime of hard work. "We're getting older," Catherine corrected. "There's a difference." "Fair point." Wyatt smiled at her. "Any regrets? Things you wish you'd done differently?" Catherine thought about it seriously as she did with all his questions. "No, not one. I've lived a full life, Wyatt. I've been a teacher, a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I've seen children grow up and make their own way. I've seen this ranch grow from a small operation to something substantial. I've watched you build everything you dreamed of. How could I have regrets? I love you, Catherine Sullivan, just as much today as I did that day in Silver Ridge when I first saw you standing there looking lost and beautiful. I love you too. Thank you for taking me wherever I needed to go. My pleasure, then, now, and always." The years continued to pass, each bringing its own joys and sorrows. Wyatt's father passed away in Texas, and though they hadn't spoken in years, Wyatt traveled back for the funeral. He returned quietly sad, mourning not the man his father had been, but the relationship they'd never managed to build. Catherine's mother died the following year, and Catherine traveled to Boston for the first time in over 30 years. She barely recognized the city she'd left, and it felt foreign to her now. Her father, elderly and frail, wept when he saw her, telling her how proud he was of what she'd built out west. Catherine returned to New Mexico, grateful for the closure, but confirmed in her knowledge that she belonged in the West. Jamie took over the ranch completely when Wyatt was 65, though Wyatt remained involved in an advisory capacity. It was a smooth transition, father to son, maintaining the legacy Wyatt had built. Catherine watched her children and grandchildren growing, building their own lives, and felt profound satisfaction. This was her legacy, this family, these people who carried forward the values she and Wyatt had tried to instill. Hard work, honesty, kindness, perseverance. In 1920, when Catherine was 65 and Wyatt 70, New Mexico celebrated its 8th year of statehood with a fair in Santa Fe. The entire family attended, 3 generations of Sullivans descending on the city. They stayed at a hotel, the same one that used to be the boarding house where Wyatt had stayed during his courtship, now expanded and modernized. Catherine stood in the plaza, watching her grandchildren chase each other around the fountain, while her children supervised and Wyatt talked cattle prices with Jamie. The plaza hadn't changed much since she'd first seen it in 1878, though the buildings were maintained better and electric lights had been installed. Rose appeared at her side, now 50, a respected educator with grown children of her own. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" "Everything. How much has changed and how much has stayed the same." Catherine smiled at her daughter. "Your father and I used to walk in this plaza when he was courting me. I was so young, so certain I knew what I wanted. I thought teaching was my entire purpose. But you did teach. You taught for over 25 years. I did, but I also learned that life is bigger than one purpose, one calling. I was a teacher, yes, but I was also so much more. Wife, mother, rancher, friend. All of it mattered. All of it was part of who I became." Rose hugged her mother. "You taught us that, all of us, to be more than one thing, to embrace life fully. It's one of the greatest lessons you ever gave us." That night, the family gathered for dinner at a restaurant, filling an entire private room with their noise and laughter. Catherine sat at the head of the table with Wyatt beside her, looking at the faces around her. 5 children, all grown and successful in their own ways. 11 grandchildren, ranging from young adults to small children. All healthy, all here, all testament to the life she and Wyatt had built together. Wyatt stood, raising his glass. "I want to make a toast to my wife, Catherine, who took a chance on a cowboy, who offered her a ride to Santa Fe, who built a life and a family that surpasses anything I could have dreamed, who has been my partner in every sense for over 40 years. I love you, Catherine. Thank you for saying yes when I asked if you needed help, and for saying yes when I asked you to marry me." "To Catherine," the family chorused, raising their glasses. Catherine felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. These were happy tears, tears of gratitude and love and fulfillment. The years grew gentler. Catherine and Wyatt spent more time on the porch, less time actively working. They traveled occasionally to visit children and grandchildren scattered across New Mexico and Colorado. They attended weddings and funerals, watched babies be born and friends grow old. In 1925, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. The family threw an enormous party at the ranch, inviting seemingly everyone in the territory. A photographer came and took formal portraits, capturing Catherine and Wyatt standing together in front of the house they had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Catherine studied that photograph often in the years that followed. She and Wyatt looked old in it. There was no denying that. Wyatt's face was deeply lined, his hair completely white. Her own face bore the marks of 70 years of living. But their eyes, when you looked closely, their eyes were the same as they had been in 1878, full of love, full of life, full of joy in each other. Wyatt's health began to fail when he was 78. Nothing dramatic, just a slow winding down, a gradual weakening. Catherine nursed him tenderly, and he bore it with patience, never complaining even when she knew he must be uncomfortable. On a warm evening in May of 1928, as the sun set in its familiar glory, Wyatt asked Catherine to help him out to the porch. She did, supporting his weight, settling him into his favorite chair. She sat beside him, holding his hand, and they watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. "I've had a good life," Wyatt said quietly. "The best life. Thank you for giving it to me." "You gave it to me," Catherine corrected, her throat tight. "That day in Silver Ridge, you gave me everything. We gave it to each other." Wyatt's grip on her hand tightened slightly. I'm not afraid, Catherine. I've done what I set out to do. Built something lasting, raised good children, loved a wonderful woman. A man can't ask for more than that. Don't talk like that. You're tired, that's all. You'll feel better tomorrow. But Wyatt shook his head gently. We both know that's not true. It's all right, my love. I'm ready. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Keep living. Don't let my passing stop you from enjoying whatever time you have left. Keep teaching if you want. Keep spending time with the grandchildren. Keep watching the sunsets from this porch. Live fully until the end. Catherine was crying now, unable to stop the tears. How can I do any of that without you? The same way you did everything else in your life, with courage and determination and grace. Wyatt managed a smile. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Catherine Sullivan. You'll be fine. They sat there as the sun disappeared and the stars emerged. Wyatt's breathing grew slower, quieter. Catherine held his hand and told him all the things she'd told him 1,000 times before. How much she loved him, how grateful she was, how he'd given her everything she'd never known she needed. When the moon rose, bright and full, Wyatt took one more breath and quietly slipped away. Catherine sat with him for a long time, holding his hand, memorizing his face in the moonlight. Then she stood, kissed his forehead one last time, and went to tell her family that Wyatt was gone. The funeral was enormous, people coming from across the state to pay their respects. Wyatt had been a respected rancher, a good neighbor, an honest businessman. But more than that, he'd been a good man, and people remembered that. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, Wyatt Sullivan, 1852 to 1928, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built something lasting. Catherine grieved deeply but not endlessly. She'd promised Wyatt she would keep living, and she intended to honor that promise. She remained at the ranch, though Jamie tried to convince her to move into the main house with him and Elizabeth. She refused, wanting to keep her independence as long as she could. She spent her days tending her garden, reading, visiting with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were starting to arrive. She went to town occasionally, shopping or attending church. She sat on the porch every evening, watching the sunset as she had done with Wyatt for so many years, talking to him as if he were still there. In the fall of 1930, Catherine was sitting on that porch when Mary arrived with her own children. Mary was now 38, still teaching, still unmarried, and content with her life. Mama, Mary said, sitting beside her mother, I've been thinking about writing a book, about your life, about how you came west and met Papa and built all this. Would you help me? Tell me the stories so I can write them down? Catherine considered it. Why would anyone want to read about my life? Because it's an amazing life. A Boston schoolteacher who got stranded in a mining town and ended up building a ranch dynasty. A love story for the ages. History that should be preserved. So, they began the project, Mary coming to the ranch twice a week with her notebook and pen, Catherine telling her stories. About Boston and the journey west. About the stagecoach driver abandoning her. About a tall cowboy with hazel green eyes saying, I'll take you wherever you need. About falling in love on the trail to Santa Fe. About building a life on a small ranch. About 5 children and 11 grandchildren and countless students. About a love that lasted over 50 years. It took a year to finish, and when it was done, Mary had a manuscript of several hundred pages. She sent it to a publisher in Santa Fe, hoping they might be interested in regional stories. To everyone's surprise, they were. The book was published in 1932, titled Wherever You Need, A Woman's Journey in the West. It sold modestly but steadily, particularly in New Mexico, and Catherine found herself something of a local celebrity. People would stop her in town, wanting to talk about the book, telling her how much they'd enjoyed it. Former students wrote letters saying they'd never known all of what she'd been through. Her grandchildren read it with fascination, learning details of their grandparents' lives they'd never known. Catherine, now 77, took it all with grace and some amusement. She'd never sought attention, but if her story could inspire others, particularly women, to embrace opportunities and take risks, then she was glad of it. She continued living independently until she was 82, when a bad fall convinced her to finally move in with Jamie and Elizabeth. They set up a nice room for her in the main house, with windows overlooking her beloved ranch, and Catherine settled in with good humor. She spent her final years surrounded by family, telling stories to great-grandchildren who sat wide-eyed listening to tales of the Old West. She remained sharp and engaged, reading newspapers and following world events, offering advice when asked, and keeping her own counsel when not. On a spring morning in 1936, Catherine woke early and asked Jamie to help her out to the porch. It was the same porch Wyatt had built all those years ago, expanded and maintained, but essentially unchanged. Jamie settled her in a comfortable chair with blankets, bringing her tea and asking if she needed anything else. "I'm fine, dear. Thank you. I just want to sit here for a while." Catherine sat watching the sunrise, something she'd done thousands of times. The ranch spread out before her, buildings and fences and cattle, all the physical manifestation of the life she and Wyatt had built. But more than that, more important than that, this land held her family, her legacy, the love that had started with a simple offer of help on a dusty street in Silver Ridge. She thought about that day, so many years ago. Thought about standing there alone and frightened, watching the stagecoach disappear. Thought about Wyatt approaching, offering to help, offering to take her wherever she needed. He had taken her exactly where she needed to be, not just to Santa Fe, but to this life, this love, this family. He'd given her everything she'd never known to ask for. Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She could almost feel Wyatt beside her, his hand in hers, his voice soft in her ear saying, "I'm here, Catherine. I've always been here." She smiled, content and at peace, and quietly slipped away to join him. They buried Catherine beside Wyatt on the hillside with a headstone that matched his. Catherine Sullivan, 1855 to 1936, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, teacher. She found exactly what she needed. The family gathered after the funeral, 3 generations of Sullivans filling the ranch house. They shared stories and memories, crying and laughing in equal measure. They talked about how Catherine and Wyatt had built all this from nothing, how their love had created a legacy that would continue for generations. Jamie stood and raised his glass. "To my mother and father, who taught us that love is a choice, that family is everything, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. May we honor their memory by living as they lived, with courage, integrity, and love." "To Catherine and Wyatt," the family chorused. The sun set that evening in its familiar glory, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. On the hillside, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. In Silver Ridge, now a larger and more prosperous town, an old woman sat in her rocking chair and told her great-grandchildren a story. "Did I ever tell you about the day a stagecoach driver left a woman stranded here and a cowboy offered to help her? Well, that was back in 1878, and that cowboy was Wyatt Sullivan, and that woman was Catherine Moore. And what happened next? Well, that's a love story for the ages. And somewhere, in the place beyond the stars, Catherine and Wyatt danced together under an endless sky, finally and forever exactly where they needed to be,